Who is the only woman ever sentenced to life imprisonment for Nazi war crimes? Her name is Ilse Koch. Known as the Witch of Buchenwald, she stands accused of atrocities that defy comprehension, selecting prisoners for their tattoos to create gruesome keepsakes like lampshades and book covers, and orchestrating unimaginable acts of cruelty. On April 11, 1947, in a courtroom set up inside the former Dachau concentration camp, Ilse Koch faces trial. But as her story unfolds, the line between fact and myth begins to blur. Was she truly the monstrous figure described in survivor testimonies, or has her infamy been exaggerated by time and propaganda? Welcome to Dark Chronicles. Today, we delve into the chilling tale of Ilse Koch, uncovering the woman behind the legends, and the horrors that made her name infamous. Germany in the early 1930s was a nation in turmoil. The rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party brought sweeping changes, transforming the country into a totalitarian state. Dissent was crushed, political opponents were silenced, and entire communities were targeted under the guise of creating a racially pure society. One of the most chilling tools of this regime was the concentration camp system, designed to imprison, exploit, and ultimately annihilate those deemed enemies of the state. In 1937, plans were laid for a new camp that would become a cornerstone of this brutal system, Buchenwald. Located near the historic city of Weimar, a place celebrated for its poets and philosophers, the camp stood as a grotesque mockery of German cultural ideals. Construction began in July 1937, with 149 prisoners transferred from Sachsenhausen to clear the dense forest of Ettersberg Hill. These men, political dissidents, Jehovah's Witnesses and others considered undesirable, were forced to build their own prison, working under the watchful eyes of armed SS guards. Buchenwald's design reflected its grim purpose. Spanning over 40 hectares, it was enclosed by electrified fences and barbed wire, with 23 watchtowers manned day and night. Its gate bore the inscription Jedem das Sein, to each his own, a chilling declaration of the Nazi belief in absolute power over the lives of those they deemed inferior. Within its walls, prisoners faced starvation, forced labor, and a daily struggle for survival. It was in this setting that Karl Otto Koch arrived, appointed commandant of Buchenwald in 1937. A seasoned SS officer, Karl was known for his strict discipline and unwavering loyalty to the Nazi regime. But his arrival at Buchenwald was not just the beginning of his reign of terror, it was also the start of his wife Ilse's descent into infamy. Ilse Koch, born Ilse Kohler in Dresden in 1906, came from a modest working-class family. She was ambitious and intelligent, attending business school and securing a position as a secretary in the early 1930s. Her involvement with the Nazi Party began in 1932 when she joined the NSDAP as a secretary. It was through this position that she met Karl Otto Koch, a man whose ambition matched her own. Their relationship quickly blossomed, and the two married in 1937. That same year, the newlyweds moved to Buchenwald, where Karl assumed his command. Unlike many SS officers' wives, Ilse did not remain in the background. She embraced her new life with enthusiasm, taking an active interest in the camp's operations. From the moment she stepped foot in Buchenwald, Ilse began carving a place for herself in the dark history of the Third Reich. The Villa Koch was a place of stark contrasts, a symbol of excess and privilege perched on the edge of unimaginable human suffering. Constructed in 1938, the villa was designed to be the residence of Karl Otto Koch, commandant of Buchenwald, and his wife Ilse. But this grand home came at a terrible cost. Built entirely by prisoners under harsh conditions, the villa's construction reflected the cruelty of the regime. Prisoners worked tirelessly, clearing land, hauling materials and building the structure, all while enduring beatings, starvation, and exhaustion. What was meant to cost 40,000 Reichsmarks ballooned to over $500,000, funded by a sinister system of theft and exploitation. Karl Koch ordered the confiscation of valuables, money, and personal belongings from the prisoners, including funds sent by their families. These stolen riches financed the villa's luxurious interiors, including fine furniture, expensive decorations, and a private zoo for the Koch children. From the outside, the Villa Koch appeared idyllic, a charming mansion built of stone and wood, surrounded by manicured gardens. Inside, however, it stood as a monument to greed and depravity. The lavish furnishings, including imported rugs, crystal chandeliers, and elaborate artwork, spoke to the Koch's insatiable appetite for indulgence. For Ilse, this was a life of luxury unlike anything she had known. But Ilse's role at the villa went far beyond that of a housewife. Survivors later described her as an active and intimidating presence. She frequently roamed the campgrounds, her sharp gaze scanning the prisoners. Tales of her cruelty began to circulate. She would walk through the camp wearing revealing clothing, daring prisoners to look at her. Those who did were often singled out for punishment. Ilse memorized their prisoner numbers and reported them to her husband, who ensured they faced brutal beatings or worse. The villa became the setting for Ilse's growing infamy. She commissioned new additions to the property, including a riding arena and stables, indulging her passion for horseback riding. These expansions also were built by the prisoners, many of whom paid with their lives for her whims. Meanwhile, the camp itself became a sight of unspeakable horror. Prisoners starved, worked to death, or were subjected to gruesome medical experiments, while the Koch family enjoyed the comforts of their grand home. Despite the horrors surrounding her, Ilse crafted an image of domestic bliss. She meticulously compiled a photo album documenting the family's life at Buchenwald. The album included images of her children playing in the garden, family outings, and even visits to the camp's zoo, which housed exotic animals and provided entertainment for SS officers and their families. These photographs, which portrayed an idyllic life of leisure and happiness, stood in chilling contrast to the suffering and death that defined Buchenwald. As the years passed, rumors about Ilse Koch's behavior grew darker. Her walks through the camp, her reported fascination with human tattoos, and her rumored collection of human skin trophies made her a figure of terror and revulsion. While the truth of these accusations would later come under scrutiny, there was no doubt that Ilse Koch had fully embraced her role as a symbol of the excesses and atrocities of the Nazi regime. Life inside Buchenwald was a living nightmare. For the prisoners, survival was a daily battle against starvation, disease, and the relentless cruelty of their captors. Packed into overcrowded barracks, they slept on thin wooden planks, often sharing the same space with dozens of others. Food was scarce. A watery soup and a piece of bread were often all they received, barely enough to sustain the grueling labor they were forced to endure. Work in Buchenwald was backbreaking. Prisoners toiled in nearby quarries, factories, and construction projects under the constant threat of beatings from SS guards. Many collapsed from exhaustion, only to be dragged away or executed as a warning to others. For those who fell ill, the so-called hospital was a place of horror. Here, medical experiments were conducted on prisoners, turning them into unwilling subjects for testing vaccines, poisons, and surgical procedures. Among the most sinister atrocities at Buchenwald were the medical experiments conducted on prisoners. Under the direction of SS doctors, inmates were used as unwilling subjects for gruesome trials. Vaccines for typhus and other diseases were tested on the prisoners, often leading to excruciating pain. Some were deliberately infected with diseases to study their progression, while others were subjected to chemical burns, poison injections, and more. These experiments were carried out with complete disregard for human life, treating prisoners as disposable objects in the pursuit of Nazi scientific ambitions. Rumors also reported the prisoners' skins would have been taken because of the tattoos, under a scientific study excuse to reveal the relationship between delinquency and tattooing. A doctor was also offered the skull of a Polish prisoner. The brutality extended beyond physical suffering. The camp's leadership implemented psychological terror to break the prisoners' spirits. Executions were common, with inmates forced to watch as their fellow prisoners were outlived. The commandant, Karl Koch, was known for his iron rule, but his wife, Ilse, soon earned an equally chilling reputation. Ilse Koch's behavior within the camp quickly became infamous. Survivors described her as sadistic and unrelenting in her cruelty. She would stroll through the camp wearing provocative clothing, daring prisoners to look at her. Those who met her gaze were often reported to her husband, leading to brutal punishments or even death. Rumors circulated that she had an unnatural fascination with human tattoos. It was said that she selected prisoners with distinctive designs and had their skin removed after their execution to create macabre artifacts such as lampshades and book covers. While these stories painted a horrifying portrait, the truth remains tangled in a web of survivor testimonies, wartime propaganda, and post-war sensationalism. Yet amidst this unimaginable suffering there was one place in Buchenwald where life was treated with care: the camp zoo. Established in 1938 on the orders of Karl Koch, the zoo was located just outside the camp's electrified fences. It housed deer, birds, and even a group of bears. For the SS officers and their families, the zoo was a place of leisure, an escape from the grim realities of their duties. In a chilling twist, Karl Koch, who showed no mercy toward the prisoners under his control, reportedly expressed outrage at any mistreatment of the animals in the zoo. In one documented order, he demanded that visitors refrain from harming or disturbing the animals, emphasizing the need to treat them with reason and love. This bizarre contradiction highlighted the warped priorities of the Nazi regime, a world where the well-being of animals could provoke indignation, while human suffering was ignored or actively encouraged. While the atrocities of Buchenwald are undeniable, separating fact from fiction in Ilse Koch's case is challenging. The stories of her sadism and alleged collection of human skin artifacts contributed to her nickname, the Witch of Buchenwald. However, historians have noted that many of these claims were amplified by post-war propaganda and media sensationalism. The court at the end of the war was then in charge to clarify whether yes or no, she was involved in the collection of skin. What is certain is that Ilse Koch wielded power within Buchenwald and used it to instill fear. Her presence alone was enough to terrify prisoners, and her actions, both proven and alleged, cemented her place as one of the most notorious figures of the Nazi regime. The reign of Karl Koch as commandant of Buchenwald was defined by excess, corruption, and brutality. But by the early 1940s, cracks began to form in the facade of his seemingly untouchable power. Behind the scenes, tensions grew as Karl's actions drew scrutiny. Not from those who opposed the Nazi regime, but from within the ranks of the SS itself. While Buchenwald was a site of immense suffering for its prisoners, it also became a source of wealth for the Koch family, as we mentioned before. But greed has consequences, even under the Nazi regime. By 1941, suspicions of corruption reached the attention of Karl's superior, SS Obergruppenführer, Josias von Waldeck-Pyrmont. Reports surfaced of missing funds, unauthorized executions, and gross misconduct. Among these accusations was an event that would seal Karl Koch's fate. In 1941, Karl Koch was diagnosed with syphilis, a sexually transmitted disease that carried significant stigma. Fearing the implications of his illness becoming public, Koch sought treatment from two prisoner doctors within Buchenwald. These men under duress treated him in secrecy, but to ensure their silence, Karl ordered their execution once the treatment was complete. What Karl did not anticipate was that one of the executed prisoners had also treated his superior, von Waldeck-Pyrmont. Outraged by Karl's reckless actions, von Waldeck-Pyrmont launched a formal investigation into the commandant's conduct. The inquiry revealed the full extent of Karl Koch's corruption and abuse of power. Embezzlement, unauthorized killings, and misuse of camp resources were all brought to light. Even within the SS, an organization accustomed to atrocity, Karl's actions were deemed intolerable. He was arrested and placed in custody, a rare event for a high-ranking officer within the Nazi hierarchy. In a surprising twist, it was Heinrich Himmler himself who intervened to have Koch released. However, the damage was done. Stripped of his position, Karl was reassigned to another camp, his influence and reputation in tatters. But his fall from grace was far from over. As Karl Koch's power began to crumble, so too did the carefully constructed image of his wife. By 1943, Ilse Koch's life descended into chaos. Once seen as a figure of cold control, she became infamous for her reckless behavior. Rumors spread among the SS about her heavy drinking, frequent bouts of drunkenness, and her neglect of her children. Her once meticulous appearance was now overshadowed by scandalous stories of infidelity, as she was accused of engaging in numerous affairs with other SS officers. What began as whispers soon became open disdain, even among her peers, as her conduct became too flagrant to ignore. In 1944, Karl Koch faced a tribunal convened by the SS. This trial was not about justice for the prisoners of Buchenwald but rather an effort by the Nazi regime to discipline one of its own. Karl was charged with corruption, violations of SS codes of conduct, and even the execution of prisoners without authorization. The tribunal found him guilty on all counts. In December 1944, Karl Koch was executed by firing squad, his body incinerated in the very camp he once ruled with an iron fist. His death marked the end of his reign but left behind a legacy of cruelty, corruption, and betrayal. Ilse Koch remained in the Villa Koch following her husband's arrest and eventual end. With Karl gone, her position within Buchenwald became increasingly precarious. Rumors of her behavior continued to spread, and her once protected status began to erode. Yet Ilse's story was far from over. As the Allied forces closed in on Germany in the spring of 1945, Ilse Koch fled Buchenwald. Leaving behind the villa and the camp where she had built her infamy, she sought refuge in the town of Ludwigsburg in southwestern Germany. It was here, far from the horrors of Buchenwald, that she attempted to disappear into obscurity. But her escape was short-lived. On April 11, 1945, the 4th Armored Division of the United States Army liberated Buchenwald, and the world began to learn the full extent of the atrocities committed there. The American soldiers who entered the camp were unprepared for the horrors they would encounter. They found emaciated prisoners, many of whom were on the brink of death, and piles of bodies. Tools of mistreatments, evidence of grotesque medical experiments, and other chilling remnants of Nazi barbarity lay scattered throughout the camp. Among the most horrifying discoveries were shrunken heads, tattooed skin allegedly used for lampshades, and jars containing preserved organs. These findings left an indelible mark on the soldiers and the journalists who followed in their wake. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, commander of the Allied forces in Europe, visited the liberated camps, including a nearby subcamp of Buchenwald called Ohrdruf. He was determined to document the atrocities, not only for historical record but also to ensure that the world could never deny what had happened. In his own words, "The things I saw beggar description, the visual evidence and the verbal testimony of starvation, cruelty and bestiality were so overpowering as to leave me a bit sick. I made the visit deliberately, in order to be in a position to give first-hand evidence of these things, if ever, in the future, there develops a tendency to charge these allegations merely to propaganda." Eisenhower insisted that the local population, many of whom claimed ignorance of the camp's activities, witness the evidence firsthand. Under his orders, more than 1,000 residents of the nearby town of Weimar were brought to Buchenwald. Forced to walk among the camp, they were confronted with the stark reality of the atrocities committed so close to their homes. Some wept openly, others fainted, and many could not bring themselves to look. This act of forced confrontation was a deliberate attempt to shatter the silence and denial that had allowed such horrors to persist. The discovery of Buchenwald and the subsequent efforts to document its horrors sent shockwaves around the world. Reports in newspapers and newsreels brought images of the camp to audiences across the globe. One name was outstanding in the testimonies of survivors and witnesses: Ilse Koch. Following her capture by American forces in 1945, Ilse Koch became one of the most infamous faces of Nazi atrocities. Dubbed the Witch of Buchenwald by the press, she was accused of crimes that embodied the worst of the Nazi regime. Allegations of her sadism, her fascination with human tattoos, and the rumored creation of grotesque artifacts like lampshades made from human skin turned her into a symbol of depravity. But the trials that followed would reveal both undeniable truths and troubling uncertainties. Ilse Koch first stood trial in 1947 at Dachau, under the jurisdiction of an American military tribunal. She was charged with war crimes and crimes against humanity for her actions at Buchenwald. Survivors came forward to testify, recounting the fear she inspired in the camp. They spoke of her cruel behavior, her role in selecting prisoners for punishment, and the chilling rumors about her collection of tattooed human skin. The trial captivated global attention, with the press sensationalizing the most lurid aspects of her alleged crimes. However, despite the horrifying testimonies, some of the most shocking claims, such as the lampshade made from human skin, could not be conclusively proven. Items presented as evidence were later determined to be made of animal hide, raising questions about the accuracy of certain accusations. The lamp could not be verified later, since it was inadvertently missing from the evidence. Nevertheless, the tribunal found her guilty of her role in the atrocities at Buchenwald. She was sentenced to life imprisonment, but controversy soon followed. In 1948, just a year after her sentencing, Ilse Koch's punishment was reduced to 4 years by American authorities. The decision was based on a lack of conclusive evidence for some of the more sensational charges. This move sparked outrage, particularly in the United States, where her case had become a symbol of justice for survivors. Public pressure mounted, and in response American officials handed her over to German authorities for further prosecution. In 1950, Ilse Koch was tried again, this time under German law. This trial focused on her incitement to murder and her direct participation in atrocities at Buchenwald. By now, her reputation as the Witch of Buchenwald was deeply entrenched, and the court faced immense public scrutiny. On January 15, 1951, she was sentenced to life imprisonment, the first woman to receive such a punishment for Nazi war crimes under German jurisdiction. For the next 16 years, Ilse Koch remained a symbol of Nazi cruelty. On September 1, 1967, she was found inanimate in her prison cell, having taken her own life. In her final letter to her son, she wrote, "There is no other way for me. Death is my release." Her end marked the end of a life steeped in infamy, but her story continues to be a point of fascination and controversy. While some claims about her actions remain unproven, her complicity in the horrors of Buchenwald is undeniable. Ilse Koch's story is one of cruelty, excess, and the unimaginable horrors of the Nazi regime. Whether fact or myth, the tales surrounding her have cemented her place as one of history's most infamous figures. While some of the more lurid allegations remain unproven, her role in the atrocities at Buchenwald is beyond question. Still, she will be the only woman ever sentenced to life imprisonment for Nazi war crimes. But what do you think? Was Ilse Koch's infamy exaggerated by propaganda and post-war sensationalism, or does the truth justify her enduring reputation as the Witch of Buchenwald? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you found this story fascinating, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more dark and compelling tales from history. Thank you for watching, and as always, take care and see you in the next episode.